Don't mind the fact that it seems to be really bright out there right now. No, I'm not a time wizard, and no, I don't seem more energetic because I'm high or something. This is due to the fact that this video is actually being cut into multiple parts from whenever I actually come across new information, and then at that point I will just record and update the video accordingly. But either way, welcome back. It has been about 2 weeks by the time you see this video since the entire thing with KV's cancellation happened. And I figured, seeing how most of the dust has already settled around the situation, that now would be a good time to talk about it, maybe dispel some of the misinformation that exists out there, while also maybe giving my own observations of it. When it comes to the misinformation that exists, there is a lot of things out there right now. So I figured we should just go through that and then talk about what facts we do know have already been established in this situation, such as the fact that, yeah, Nexon did not sue Dynamis 1 for what has happened so far. As in, they have not gone through the court filings to actually have them sued. And this is something that you can actually tell from the fact that there are no court filings that exist right now. And quite frankly, if there were, I highly doubt that the mainstream media in Korea would have kept quiet about this, considering the fact that they were already going all in to report about the situation at the time. Of course, this brings us to the two branches of what people thought they might be getting sued for. The first was a non-competition clause where you try to prevent someone who leaves the company from setting up something that could compete and harm your business. Now, thankfully for me, I actually went to university and I actually took Business Law 101, which was very important in teaching me that I do not want to be a lawyer when I grow up. And it also taught me enough that I actually kind of realized that something was very off with the explanations people were giving as to why it would be valid in this situation. And more importantly than all of that, it also taught me that when you're unclear about the law, you don't diddle your thumbs in your ass and try to guess what happened. Instead, you actually try to find proper information from an actual attorney to try and make sense of the situation at hand. So what I have here for you guys is information from Sean Hayes, the first non-Korean attorney to work in the Korean courts of law and as a full-time member of the Korean law faculty. The reason why I'm bringing him up is because it's all in English. You people who watch this video, I am speaking the spoken English, I think. And it will probably be something that is easier for you guys to understand as well. And if for some reason you guys have that much strong doubts about what I'm saying, and the thing is, he actually wrote an article about anti or non-competition clauses in Korea as well. And when it comes to these clauses, he does point out there are 6 things that the courts will typically take into account when deciding if clauses can actually be considered reasonable. First of which is the employee's position in the company before his termination from the company. That is to say, the more senior the guy is, the more likely this is to happen. The employer has specific interests that need to be protected. That is to say, there's some kind of trade secret. Like, for example, in the case of Coca-Cola, it would be the recipe for Coca-Cola itself. If you were to take that and you were to try to make your own drink which is identical and sell that, yeah, then they have a case to sue the fuck out of you. The scope of the restrictions, that is to say time and geography. Note that geography is also a very important thing in that you can't really just say that, yeah, you can't go to a competitor within Korea, because that would be quite insane, especially in this situation if you think about it, because how do you then define a competitor in the game industry? Is it everyone that makes a game? If so, you're basically saying that the guy has no way to get a job for however long this clause lasts for. And this point on its own tends to be very difficult for companies to actually get a reasonable clause on. So when we go to the 4th point, whether compensation was paid in exchange for the specific clause itself. Now, we won't know this ever, obviously, because this is something that is written in the contracts that only the people privy to the contract will know. However, if they actually did pay them a compensation for this, I get the feeling that Nexon would have sued them long ago. They wouldn't be waiting around to dangle it over their heads to make them cancel the project. They would have just sued them to the ground the moment this was breached. The situation leading up to the termination of the employee, which in this case, most of them left on their own terms. And the thing is that the producer, Young-ha himself, the head dude in Blue Archive still, also did mention that they left on fairly good terms, which this is something that can actually be brought up in a court of law, as it is something announced officially by one of the involved parties himself. Everything else that we do know tends to come from whistleblowers or from rumors online. So unless the situation goes to court and people are actually brought up to testify for it, realistically looking at the situation now, there is very low likelihood that this can even be used either. And lastly is whether or not public interest can be served, but we don't give a fuck about that because there is no public interest that can be served in this specific situation. The other direction as well was people talking about how they were going to get sued, or they were in the process of being sued for financial fraud because some blind rumors apparently came up saying that they had forged some of the registrations for the company, people neglect to remember the fact that this specific rumor came up 2 to 3 months ago. And realistically, if there was actually an issue of financial fraud, I don't think that Nexon and like the government themselves are gonna wait 2 to 3 months for Project KV to come up and then dangle this in front of their face, tell them to like, hey, you better stop doing that or we'll bring it to court. If this actually happened, I feel like they would have already been brought to court. That said, when it comes to such sources, especially with Blind, I feel like there is a little bit of a gap in how Korean and to some extent Japanese people view these sources as compared to how people in the English-speaking regions do. And I feel like this is something that I could at least try to some extent to talk a bit about as well. Because when I've talked to people within my own circle, people who work within the game industry in Japan, as well as listening to what the people I know who work within the industry have mentioned, that they and their friends or their colleagues have come to conclusions on this entire case, it does feel like generally people in Japan are more willing to accept some of this information as well. And I feel like this is a twofold issue, first of which is the fact that within both Japan and Korea, you don't have anti-slap laws, meaning that if someone were to come out and speak out against a company, it is not very difficult for the company to then swing back and slap them with a lawsuit. It would be, as an individual, kind of hard to deal with this. And, you know, obviously the people in Dynamics 1 aren't going to sue Next themselves, but as an individual, you still do not want to get embroiled in a situation that could potentially pull your company into some sort of conflict as well. Plus, there tends to be some level of companies being more controlling of what their employees can do over social media. I mean, when you're big enough of a name like all of the more famous developers out there, the tendency is that to some extent you have a level of freedom to say what you want, but you can't go off the rails as well, as your image tends to get tied to the company to some extent as well. You can't exactly go around saying like, I didn't like that game or I didn't like that game from another company, because words like those might be misconstrued as, you know, trying to disparage the competition, obviously. But more so than that, when it comes to the individual rank and file members, you know, people like me who are just like scrubs within a company, there tends to be a bit more strictness to it. So people typically don't want to actively come out with their name tied to something, because if you're in Nexon and you're the one coming out saying that, there is a very real chance that the company might just fire you on the spot for revealing all of that information, and you might get blacklisted by a fair part of the industry as well. Plus, this also comes with the added benefit of not being harassed, both by the people within the company you're whistleblowing on, as well as their fans who may not take too well to what you're saying. And as we all know, there's that certain fringe segment of Korean gamers who can get up to some pretty wild stuff whenever they get really pissed, or yeah, sometimes people just don't want to let others know who they are for their own personal safety as well. And as a result, there tends to be a bit more of a level of trust in these other forms of communication from which these people can use to then relay things that are happening within the company to people outside of it as well. Which, you know, with this specific case, it does seem like some of the information has been verifiably true, so while not all of it has been proven to be accurate, there is some level of trust that people are willing to put into it precisely because of this as well. Now, that said, I'm not telling you to blindly accept this information as fact. I just wanted to provide context as to why this type of information might seem to be more trusted within regions within the East instead. Though with that out of the way, let's look at what is more factual first. So first up, the game is most likely cancelled. We are probably not going to see a Project KV just suddenly revive anytime soon, if at all. In a very weird turn of events, one of the freelancers that they hired to assist with the scenario writing apparently had some level of ties to the Japanese game industry, and so I managed to actually get in contact with one of them, who mentioned that they have basically like had all of their future work with the company cancelled as well. Which brings us to the second point, which is that according to a fairly reliable mainstream media reporter who reported on the topic, it would seem that Shift Up had actually shown to some extent an interest in investing in Project KV, but they had not yet invested in it. And this brings us to the third point, which is that up until now, it would seem that Dynamics 1 has also not sent any job opening to the major recruitment firms either. So I don't know how typically you guys find jobs in like game companies in the West, but typically over here in the East, these recruitment firms are fairly important, as they tend to actually have connections directly with either the HR or the developers within many of the big game companies, and so they tend to have a bit more of an advantage in the sense that they can get you very easily through some of the initial, especially document selection phase. So the fact that they do not have any openings with these companies at all, and it doesn't seem like there's anything mentioned on their site about it either, odds are they aren't really recruiting at this point. So they aren't looking at expanding into whatever mobile game the original project was supposed to be anymore. Fourthly, they had also taken on an office space with Line Games previously, which apparently Line Games has come out publicly to state that there is no direct link between them and Dynamis One. They had merely rented out or lent out the space to them as they would normally do with other companies as well. In fifth, another whistleblower apparently came out on the issue, providing both their Nexon Games name card as well as their Dynamis One name card. So this means that within the span of a few days, we have seen two whistleblowers coming out of Dynamis One. Maybe some of the things may be a little off, we don't know for certain, but they said that they were led to believe that the incentive bonuses that they were going to get were going to decrease from that point onward due to the fact that the game had been in operation for a while and therefore it would naturally decrease. This of course does not take into account the fact that Blue Archive actually has been seeing an increase in sales over time so far. Like the trend has been fairly upwards compared to year one, which is kind of abnormal. Typically most games you would see a downward trend over time. So naturally incentives would decrease as sales and revenue decreases. But since the game was increasing, it was kind of strange to hear that, but it was precisely because they apparently believed this to be true that they were all the more willing to leave at the time. This was also coupled with the fact that there was some level of dissatisfaction with the type of collabs I'm guessing that Nexon Games was trying to bring to them for global as well, as there was something mentioned about the Nexon Games actually bringing in some very weird companies for them to work with, along with some level of dissatisfaction with the fact that YoStar was feeling that the way that the story was going was a little out of control and they wanted to try to prevent it from going more in the direction it seemed to be going in. Though at that time they also apparently said that they did not know how big of an incentive the hits that left to form Dynamis One of them actually had gotten at the time. Conversely, however, the whistleblower also mentioned that a lot of the money that was being made in Blue Archive was not being used on the project itself, but instead was being funneled by Nexon to try and fund other projects as well so they could increase their portfolio of games, which also meant that they, all of them, the entire team, were actually getting less incentives than they otherwise could have had they, not been a part of Nexon. And funnily enough, this also kind of ties back to something that someone else actually mentioned in the comments of the previous video, which is that even the people at the top, in spite of the fact that he was earning a huge amount of money, he was technically still underpaid, and that both things could simultaneously be true. And this is something that I can see, although personally I would say this is probably a bigger issue for the rank and file members like the programmers and the planners instead, because typically the incentives you get are based off of your pay grade instead. So for the people at the bottom, you could very well see very little trickle down. And I feel like there is a conversation to be had about all of this in terms of how Nexon could very well be undercompensating its members as is. But at the same time, if the allegations that this whistleblower bring up are true, these people at the top intentionally push back their incentives and bonuses and were complaining then about not getting much at all, when arguably their incentive and bonus alone were probably more than 10 times the income of the entire year for some of the people within the team. They also mentioned that while Dynamis One managed to poach many of the heads over to the new company, they didn't manage to get many of the rank and file employees, the people who, are the ones producing most of the content on the grounds, to join them in this new venture. Additionally, they also mentioned that the company did not actually have a Japanese translation head, as most of the people who were within the head positions within the company all were able to speak directly with the people within YoStar fairly well. And this is something they mentioned as well, is the fact that while they were fluent in being able to communicate, they weren't very fluent in business Japanese, which is something that, especially for the in-game announcements, would tend to be handled by the people who are typically proficient in Japanese instead. The people who typically write all of the Twitter posts whenever this game goes up on maintenance and extended maintenance for the 50th time today. When you're communicating with another person from a position of some level of equality, and you as a person who is not Japanese talks to a person who, well, with your start, it may or may not have been Japanese, we don't really know, they tend to be more relaxed with that. So even if you're Keigo is not up to par, which is like the former Japanese, people tend to not really care as much. However, this kind of becomes a very different story when you as a company are trying to apologize to the Japanese people after, fucking up their little thing at Comiket. At that point, as a corporate entity, there is some level of expectation that as you are targeting the Japanese market with your new game, you kind of should be able to apologize in a way that makes sense, not give them a machine translated apology and then take that down and apologize again after. Because, business Japanese, it's a very complicated thing. It's so complicated, in fact, that they don't even teach it in schools in Japan. Most people kind of just enter the workforce and kind of to figure it out or learn it from the company. So without grasping all of this, it can be a little difficult to navigate through the landscape at times. But as far as facts come, this is about it. I don't think we're actually ever gonna get a definitive answer from either Nexon or Dynamis 1, because the thing is that no one is gonna come out and admit to all of this in a setting where no one is basically being brought to court. In that vein though, if the information that was given by the mainstream media reporter who said that they managed to get some information out of Shift Up is to be believed, then what we can say is that it is quite likely that this game, Project KV, was not likely to just be a visual novel. Granted, a visual novel may have been the teaser that they were planning to release at Comiket in preparation for the actual title's release in the future, but it definitely would not have been the entirety of the project at the time. If it was, I highly doubt that Shift Up would have asked them for a working prototype at the time, nor would they have been interested in investing in such a project. Part of the reason why you see so many visual novel companies of the past that have grown to a certain scale start to pivot away from visual novels instead, because after a certain point it just becomes very difficult to sustain all of your stuff on just visual novels alone, because the market, while it is full of people who really love these games, it's not enough to sustain a medium to large size company. That, and frankly, if they truly had like a year plus to work on this and prepare for it beforehand, and they couldn't even prepare a prototype for a visual novel, yeah, I don't think this project would have ended up well in the first place. In fact, I would go as far as to say confidently that if they actually just wanted to prototype a visual novel, it would have taken less than a month. As well as the fact that they actually did register as a mobile service game company probably indicates that, yeah, this was gonna be something much larger in scale from the start. While with today's case, we're talking more about Korean studios in the Korean game industry, someone did actually ask as well in the comments whether any similar case did happen in Japan as well. And I think someone else also did mention this in the comments, but I think the closest case I can think of has to do more with Fire Emblem, where the creator of the actual Fire Emblem series itself, Kagashozo, actually after leaving Nintendo tried to create his own series, which was later sold by Kadokawa, called Tearing Saga, which apparently had quite a lot of similarities to the Fire Emblem series. Now, in his case, he was both the scenario writer as well as the director and the game designer. He eventually did get sued by Nintendo for this issue. The case by Nintendo was initially tossed out, but on appeal they apparently won. And through that case, apparently him and the people who he worked with were forced to pay a fine of up to, I think, about 76 million yen. That's about this much in American Monopoly money. And most of the content that was fairly similar to Fire Emblem was forcibly removed from the game, although in that specific case, what was requested to be removed, or that the courts required that he remove, had more to do with things that weren't related to the gameplay systems themselves, but more to everything else within the game, as the gameplay systems were considered to be common enough that that was not grounds for him to be sued on as well. Copyright as well as game system patents and the like are a little different, so I don't know how much of it would actually be applicable in the case of Project KV, to be honest. I feel like we would actually need to contact Mr. Hayes and ask him for his advice to know for sure, but at the very least, it is a case that I would say is very similar, and that actually ended up not only being a financial and legal loss for the person who tried to break out on his own and create something that was very similar, but apparently it turned quite a fair bit of the Fire Emblem fanbase against him as well. The thing is, putting aside all of my opinions of Blue Archive, right, looking at this as someone who has worked across multiple game companies till today, all I can really say looking at this entire situation is that it's very unfortunate that it had to end this way, that the game had to just be cancelled completely and so suddenly, to be honest. Frankly, I would have rather at this point that the creators of Project KV had just not crumpled like a bunch of cunny cards and just actually tried to push through with their project instead, because the fact that they just ended it all so abruptly like this really just makes them look very irresponsible. Now, the thing is, I'm not saying all of them are, right? It's probably the decisions of a small number of people at the top. Looking at mainstream Korean news, it seems like they're putting a lot of the blame squarely on just Isaac's shoulders, which, in my opinion, that's rightfully so. He is, after all, the director of the previous project and the head of this new company. As someone who has always been in a position of leadership and an understanding how to manage a project, this is a massive failure on his part. Right? I'm not even going to talk about Isaka-san or the artists because, yeah, okay, maybe they were just the creatives in the project. They too were promised something, right? Maybe they were promised more freedom in what they can create. And that's why they went along for the ride. I'm not saying that Nexon is innocent in all of this, of course. This is a company that has had a long and troubled history of dealing with its employees and its staff. And even though it is bit by bit, it seems like, at least on the surface right now, trying to improve things, it is a monolithic company that has a very bad impression, especially overseas, right? Even the people in Korea who are defending Nexon in this specific case, many of them also hate Nexon. That's how bad things are for Nexon in general. And I feel like the fact that they even managed to land themselves with such a bad image may have also fed into why things may have progressed the way they did. For the people who think that all of this was some big plan by Nexon, who basically from the shadows tried to pressure them into cancelling the game, well, this is something that as the director leaving under such circumstances, he should have at least expected to some extent. And therefore, he should have at least prepared for this so that it wouldn't have ended up in this situation either. The whole thing with Iron Mace and Dark and Darker, even in that case, at the very least, the team were prepared to push through with their vision, in spite of the fact that they knew that they were doing things that were gonna get them quite likely sued by Nexon. And so, the fact that with Dynamis 1, they did not prepare for that, if we assume that Nexon actually did try to sue them, then that's something that shows a certain level of lack of proper planning when there are already precedent that they should have taken into account. And the act of ending of the project so abruptly as well, the thing and the fact of the matter is that because of what he did, it's not just him, it's not just the small number of big names that you see at the top of the project that are suffering as a result of this. There are plenty of people, freelancers, the people who they brought with them out of Nexon who are probably also going to get blacklisted by Nexon as a result of all of this. They have mentioned that they're not going to reveal any more of it. So for the people, for all the silhouettes that they shown in the trailers that were probably drawn by potentially not even the main artists themselves, those people, they put in effort and time to create that art, and now they can't even put it in their resume as something that they have created for a project. Even if it did fail, it would have been something that they could have shown, but now they're just kind of stuck, right? Because even if we assume that they are going to continue on and maybe make a new project in the future, that still means that all of the people at the grounds level who actually believed that there was a lack of compensation because they actually experienced it, as compared to the people who basically got 10 times what the salary of these people probably are in bonus, all of these people are going to end up suffering quite a fair bit, and they might very well find it to be very difficult to find a new job within the industry in Korea in the future. The same for the people such as the freelancers, such as the scenario writer I mentioned earlier. Now these people are left with gaps in their schedule. They're gonna have to struggle to fit all of those gaps so that they can make ends meet. This all could have been avoided. Get a proper PR expert, someone who can help to handle and speak out on the company's behalf to try and settle the firestorm that's happening around them this whole time. Get someone who can deal with proper business Japanese to deal with the apology to the Japanese side. Have a proper working prototype right from the get-go, right? If you're gonna announce the title, at least have something that you can show people so that people can look at the prototype of your game and be like, oh, yeah, this isn't actually Blue Archive after all. Yeah, the world is kind of the same, but the gameplay is very different. That and now the actual BA dev team themselves also have to rebuild because they lost quite a few core members. Will the game die because of this? Maybe not. I mean, they can always find more people who might be willing to work on it. But it is a fact that now there's that growing pain of trying to find and recover from the current position. So pretty much everyone has lost in this situation. But that said, this feels like I'm doom maxing a little here. How you doing, fellow kids? You see, I too can do the Zoomer speak. Yeah. So let's add a little bit of a weird positive in here somehow. So in the wake of the whole thing happening with Project KV, apparently someone who used to be managing the Project KV channel, apparently seeing all of the chaos that had been happening within the company even prior to the game's cancellation, apparently decided to start up his own little meme project called Project VK. And apparently within Korea, this started as a little silly meme, but bit by bit more and more people started to pile into the project to the point that it became such a big thing that the guy kind of had to, I think he left the KV team, and apparently the Project KV channel started to ban mentioning the Project VK, and Project VK also tried to distance itself from both Project KV as well as Blue Archive, and somehow this became a thing that ran concurrently because of the fact that they felt that they could probably come out with a product faster than Project KV could. Well, I mean, at this point, I feel like that isn't going to be too difficult, but at the same time, it does seem like ever since the actual cancellation of Project KV, that instead of actually ending off the whole thing as well, they have decided to actually push on. If the information they're putting out there is to be believed, apparently they do have some actually fairly big veterans within the game industry working on this as well. Not big in the sense of some super big famous name, but people who have been in it for a long time, some of whom have 7+ years of programming experience. I think one of them even posted their Japanese residence card as well. Wow! Is this number over here? This means that they actually managed to get a 5-year residence card, and this means that they are actually in the bracket that most people hired in a development, especially for games position, is also typically hired in. And the thing with this, the context I guess that might be missing is the fact that 5 years is actually fucking impressive, because it basically means that either you work for a super big company that's able to have the influence to get you 5 years right off the bat, or it means that you're someone who has been working and staying in Japan for long enough that the government feels that you are someone who is basically someone who should be able to be given the privilege of getting 5 years. So yeah, it does feel like this non-profit indie project does have quite a fair bit of our veterans in the industry working on it as well. Once again, thank you all for watching this video. If it was interesting, do feel free to like and subscribe. I don't think we'll be doing another video on this topic anymore, unless something really massive on the level of a lawsuit comes out, since yeah, I don't think there's anything else too much left to actually look at with all of this. Yeah, I am gonna go and rest now, because trying to do multiple videos like this isn't exactly good for my lifestyle as well. So if you want to support the channel, do feel free to support the channel through the links down below. Thank you to the following really cool people for helping to support the channel up to this point, and I'll see you guys in the next one. The channel will be returning to its regularly scheduled program here on out. So if you're interested in videos about console games or just weeb events in Japan, or sometimes when I talk about the game industry, like the videos, and if you don't like the videos, you should subscribe as well, because if you subscribe, you might actually get me fired from my job one day when this channel gets too big, but for real, yeah, before all of this has even more of a toll on my health, I'm gonna head off for today. So until next time, take care and bye-bye.